And just a note that our webinar today will be recorded and then it will be available to you. You'll receive a link. It takes a little bit of time to upload, so probably by tomorrow you should receive a link to the recording and also access to today's slideshow so you can reference back. My name is Shannon Helgeson, and I am glad to be here with you today from ERB. We'll be talking about 360 Access for CTP and Milestones. And I'm joined by my partner, Kelly Bornman from ERB. She's going to be monitoring the Q&A. So today, if you have questions, I would encourage you to utilize the Q&A to drop specific questions into, and we'll be addressing those as we see them. So again, thank you so much for coming. Our session should run today about 45 minutes. And again, this is an introductory session, but we'll also talk about some opportunities to learn more at the end of the session if you're interested in those. So we feel really proud of our mission to understand our data more deeply, and felt really proud to receive this quote from a school that they say that our data helps us tell the story of our school, and 360 Access helps them do that. And that's something that makes me feel really proud and excited to take the data from raw numbers to actually tell a story. So before we think about actually using the tool, we need to think about what lens we're looking at the data through. 360 is a robust tool with data and reports that can inform a variety of audiences. For example, we have data for administrators, data that can help them identify changes that need to be made, craft parent conversations, prepare board reports, and provide that bird's eye view that is helpful for an administrator to know. Also, at the student-facing level, 360 provides data for teachers, and that can include individualizing instruction for students, identifying areas of growth and strength for your individual students, and of course, though, always using in conjunction with your own knowledge about your kids and through your observations and assessments. This also is a useful tool for coordinating with your grade level teams for improvement on your curriculum and identifying areas for professional growth for ourselves. Data also can provide important information for students and families. And one of the things that I always remind myself and others of is the fact that data is just that, only data. It's not judgment. It's a starting point to begin a conversation about how we can all grow. It provides insight that can be used in correlation with our other data and reports, our other anecdotal knowledge of the student and the teachers in the school, and helps empower students and their families as partners in their own learning. It identifies areas of strength and growth, and it's just a tool to aid in conversations about additional support or enhanced learning opportunities. So, if you are about to consider your launching your exploration of 360, there are a few things to consider first, because the truth is when you get in there, you are going to find many options, many report opportunities. So before we become overwhelmed, we really want to just ask ourselves a few questions. First, what is it you want to understand? You will have a better time and a more effective experience if you go into your exploration already knowing what it is you're trying to learn, what story you're trying to tell. Also, consider through what lens you're looking. Are you trying to look through the lens of a high-level district administrator or even a board of trustees type member, or are you trying to look through the lens of the needs of individual students? That will help drive the reports that you choose. So you'll consider, of course, then who's your audience? How much time do you have? We can all go down the rabbit hole of clicking reports. So determining how much time we have is, of course, very important. And then asking ourselves, are there specific norms or measures or report elements that you are in need of, sometimes for an additional report that you're creating for your school? Excuse me. In order to understand the data you'll come upon, it's really helpful if you and your team have a common language, so a little statistical terminology. Now, remember that you will have access to this slideshow, so there's not a quiz at the end, and you are not expected to memorize everything that you see here, but just to get an idea for some of this common vocabulary that's really helpful to know. And the first is this idea of norms. Norms are essentially the scores of the groups to whom you are comparing your own data to. Now, not every report compares our kids to other kids, but any normed report does. And the two that you'll see most commonly are your national norms and then your independent norm. A national norm compares the performance of a student in your group to a broad population across the country. And that includes students who are both in independent schools and also public schools. That's a national norm versus an independent norm, which is specifically comparing to other schools who participate in our programming in the ERB testing group. Some areas also will have some regional norms, for example, perhaps a suburban norm, or there's a southern area norm. Not every region has that. If it doesn't come up as an option, it is probably because your area does not have that. The independent norm will compare students who are in schools that are probably more similar to your school than the national. So we want to make that choice of which group we're comparing our data to with intention. Also, I suspect many of us are familiar with this idea. It's the bell curve idea. And some of our reports will reference this bell curve distribution. And what you'll always notice is it's divided into 9 categories, or what we call stanides. And those middle 3, stanide 4, 5, and 6, always equate to 54%. And then you have 23% on each end. And this is basically looking at the percentile ranking of your student against other students in the norm group that you selected. Then there's the term scaled score. So a scaled score is the actual test performance, and it's based on question difficulty. The scale is vertical, which means over time, one would expect a student's scaled score to go up. 40 to 60 points of growth per year for an individual student is expected. If you were doing a report where you wanted to look at growth over time, this would be a useful data point to look at. Now, this is percent mastery. Percent mastery is based on your actual test performance. It doesn't compare the student to anyone else. It's compared to the actual expected standard achievement that was established by experts in the field. It does take into account the difficulty of the weight of the question, in addition to their response. And it actually uses a really interesting data tool called item response theory, where it can predict if you gave a particular student more of increasingly difficult questions, how a student would do if they were asked all the questions. And then percent on track. Percent on track is probably familiar to many people who give standardized tests. It's really just looking at what percent of students in a group meet or exceed expectations in a given subject area. And that is criterion reference. So it's comparing against the actual standard. Now, to understand the tools available to you really requires individuals to go in and spend a little time digging around. But I'm going to give you a little tour of what you will find when you log in. So in order to get started, we encourage people to find their way to erblearn.org. And once you get there, you should see, after you've logged in, it should say welcome and then your name. And if you click on that, that's actually a pull down. And you can see that underneath the name then is a pull down of member profile. And then you can see 360 access. That's what we're after today, is the 360 access. And when you click on that, I'm going to change my share here to a different slide so I can show you my live 360 access page. So you should be seeing now my 360 access page, and you should be seeing my comprehensives dashboard. When you click 360 access, this is the first thing you will see. And you can see across the top, that I am in the school year 2023-2024. And if you look just below that, you'll see this performance snapshot. And this is a really high 60,000 foot view of how my kids did. So here I had 428 students, and we can see how they were performing compared to the norm. Now, it's a nice snapshot. It's perhaps useful for a very high view, but for most of us, we probably want a little more detail. So where we want to go is across the top, we see dashboard. If we go to the right, we see reports. And when I hover over reports, my selections come up. And here's the thing I want to point out for you. When I was new to the ERB platform and the 360 Access platform, I thought, oh, so many reports. How do I know which to use? Until someone taught me that the higher on the list under performance, the higher view of the data you are looking at. So if I wanted just a general view of how my students were doing, I'm a school-wide administrator, I'm a board of trustees member, I'm the curriculum director, I'm looking at the whole view of the school, I might choose performance. However, if I am a student-facing person, like I'm a faculty member, I really want to live down here in achievement and content mastery. And if I want to take a look at individual students, then of course, student profile is where I would want to be. I really want to draw your attention today to these top 5: performance, achievement, achievement multi-year, which is the same report, but multiple years, as one would guess, content mastery, and student profile. These top 5 are where a lot of these reports you're going to want to be digging into live. Now, these bottom ones, if we have time, we can touch on those as well. These are all also very helpful reports. But let's just take a look then at that 60,000 foot view called performance. So as I open it up, I'm provided a variety of choices to make. If I have multiple schools that I'm assigned to, those choices are going to show up here, but this is just a sample school here with anonymized data. By the way, let me jump out to just say, in order to see this data, your title has to have been classified as either a test coordinator or a test administrator to see this data at all. If you are a person who's clicking into erblearn.org and going to the 360 Access and you are not getting access to any data, it's your job class, it's your title, it's your classification under your profile role that is important. You need to be called CTP test coordinator or administrator. And that's true even if you only provide milestones. So check with your site team leader or whoever's in charge of managing this at your location. If you do not see the data, have them check your role. But assuming you're getting in then, I've chosen my school and I only have one to choose from, and I'm going to choose my school year. Because we're still, well, we'll say we're fairly early in the year, I'm going to choose 2022-2023. And my school gives the test fall, winter, and spring. I give milestones throughout the year. And I want to look at just grade 4 today, although I can choose more. If your school has selected to break this into groups, like Miss Helgeson's group and Miss Bornman's group, you could see those choices here. In my school, we're looking at just all of our grade 4 students. So I'll update that. Under the assessment, I'll choose CTP and Milestones. And you can choose what subtest you'd like to select. In my case, I'll choose mathematics. And then the question of norms. Again, one wants to be intentional about deciding which norms they choose. In my example school, I have the choice of the independent norm, which is, again, just other ERB schools who are independent schools versus the national norm, which is schools across the country, both public and private. And then I also have the choice of the Southern Association of Independent Schools norm. I'll choose independent schools. That's the one that we've intelligently and intentionally chose in our district, say. Then I'll run that report. Now here we are at this very high level view. We can see all the detail of our selections at the top. We can see in these three gray boxes that we have last year's fall, winter, and spring, fall and winter milestones and the spring CTP, because that's what we do in my example school. And we can just see a total percentage as I hover over each one. I can see that I have 17% of students above norm, 54% in the fall at norm, and 30% below norm. And to the right here in pink, you are seeing a representation of that same bell curve. They've just stacked it up. Here's that top 23%, that middle, those middle three stanines at 54%, and then the 23% at the bottom. These will always be the same. And we can see then over time how our students did. Now, like most websites, anything that's blue is typically clickable. And if we click, we can actually see students' individual performance in this same way. So I can click on this, and if I scroll down, here are my individual kids. So here I have Matthew. He's got his scaled score at 307, which puts him in the second percentile in the fall. And then we see a big leap in the winter, putting him in the 27th percentile, and then a drop back in the spring on the CTP. So we can see all of our students that way. Now let's take a look at a different report. Let's take a look a little closer in. Still, if I'm at that real high level, I might like the achievement. But also, I think you might, if you're a team lead, if you're a department lead or a grade level lead, this would be useful information. We can choose achievement. We can choose achievement or achievement multi-year. It's really the same data, but one provides over time and the other does not. I'll go ahead with the over time choice, since that's one that I think people really enjoy looking at. I have to make those same selections again. What school years? Now, if I'm doing overtime, I need to choose more than 1 year. So I'm going to go ahead and choose 22-23 and also 21-22. We'll take a look at that. Now, I'm choosing all of my seasons. And here's where we make a choice: matched grade or matched group. Do I want to see how fourth graders just do every year? Or do I want to see how this particular cohort of students is doing over time? That's going to change which of these I choose. If I just want to see how fourth graders tend to do, I'll choose matched grade. In this case, I would like to see how this particular group has been doing. I'd like to know how they did over the last 2 years. So I'll take matched group. I'm going to take that fourth grade group again. And then I'd like to take also all the 21-22 students as well. I'll take CTP and Milestones. I'll do math again. And we've got the independent norm running that report. And here we are. We can watch the pink line is that independent norm, that expected path that we're looking for those students to take. The independent norm's path versus my student's path is the blue line that we're following here. And we can see that we're staying pretty close to the independent norm. Can actually break it down by score and percent of on track in that same way. Again, if I want to look at that by student, I just click View Student List in the bottom left. And as I scroll down, here I can see students, like I see if we, some of our students maybe weren't here in the previous year. So let's look at our friend William down here. William, we can see that he got a scaled score of 334 in the fall of 2021, 2022, and then 371 and 367. And now we see him in 22, 23, and we can follow his path along. Now we're getting closer to what a student-facing faculty member might find useful. So let's move ourselves to the one that, if I'm a classroom teacher, the one that I really want to see because it's going to inform my instruction, and that's content mastery. Now, understand that content mastery is going to come with a caveat. It's assuming that your curriculum and your scope and sequence that you are following aligns with the expected scope and sequence that the test is set up for. And it is not a crime if you teach geometry at a different place than ERB is set up for in the test. That is not a crime, but it is something to be aware of because it will inform your interpretation of your data. So taking a look at content mastery, similar choices. We can take a look at our school year. Let's look at 22-23. I'd like to see all my seasons. We're going to go with those same fourth graders because they're just our favorite kiddos right now. I'll choose all their tests, taking math and the independent norm, running that report. And as we look here, this is going to help inform the teacher because as we scroll down, we can see in the domain of mathematics, we can see some overarching scores across the top. But as we come down into these sub areas of each domain, we can see how they did in certain sub areas. So for example, when it comes to math, when we look, we can see that when it comes to number sense and operations with whole numbers, we can see how our students are doing. If we come down to number sense with whole numbers, fractions, and decimals, we can see how our students are doing. And what can be especially helpful is if you click on, again, anything blue, typically clickable. When we click on that, it actually breaks it down even further. So when I choose math, here are those same subdomains. Here's that number sense with operations and whole numbers, fractions, and decimals. And we can actually see the standard that falls underneath it. We can see for this group, the number correct, the number incorrect, and an important one that I think not everyone thinks about is the number skipped. When students skip a test question, it tells a story. And so I think that's important to be aware of. Maybe you've coached your students. If they don't know an answer, go ahead and skip it. That would explain it. But maybe you've coached your students excuse me, maybe you've coached your students, I want you to guess on every one, and yet they skipped certain ones. That starts to tell a story. So I would encourage you to take a look at those last two columns, the number skipped, and then also the number that were not reached at all. And that might start to tell us something about how our students are responding. And as we look again, we can see resources available. So when we click on, when we see the using place value, reading, writing, and comparing whole numbers, if I click view resources, it's going to not allow me to get where I want to go right now. There are many resources available, endless, some nice resources I encourage you to click on. Not going to be able to get that. This was for my fall milestone. I can, of course, jump over to my winter milestone and take a look at how we were doing with that same standard when it came to the winter. And then again, look at my CTP in the spring. As I pull back up to reports and I want to look even closer down, if I'm a student-facing teacher and I have a student who seems to be struggling or something seems a lot different, I might want to look right at that student profile. Same choices again. I want to look at grade 4, looking at all my grade 4 students, and now I can actually select a student. So if I want to look at my friend Meadow, I want to see all of Meadow's tests in math against the independent norm when I run that report. Here I'm able to pull up just Meadow's data. Pardon me. Again, looking at just Meadow's information. Maybe you're having a parent meeting and you want to pull up just individual data for her, or maybe you're having an intensive meeting finding ways to support one student. This would be very helpful for you. And again, we can see mathematics, we see all of these subdomains, and when we click on it, we can get to the actual standards themselves. Again, this provides valuable data. We can see here how many Meadow got right and wrong. These are not, the questions were not necessarily provided in an increasingly difficult order, but the results are being presented in order of difficulty. So what we're seeing is when Meadow got to her easiest question for using place value, she got it. But as the questions got, when she had more difficult questions, she did not get those correct. And that's important to know, that the questions do not become increasingly difficult as the test goes on, because of course, then we could assume that maybe they're getting test questions wrong because of testing fatigue or distraction or other things. One thing I'm drawn to as I look at Meadow's scores is I'm looking down at this solving real life problems involving number operations. And there were several questions provided. And what they're showing us here is that Meadow got the two easiest questions right. And then she got the next two in difficulty questions wrong, and then got harder questions still right again. And that, if we started to see a lot of that in Meadow's scores, that would start to tell me a story about is she applying herself? Is she becoming distracted? Were these two that she got correct later just luck? Or did she actually know that material? So I think this is a really useful tool for honing in on what's going on in the head of that person being tested. So I encourage you to take a close look at that. Other reports that are available here, I told you we would focus in on these top 5. And they're really these are your day-to-day useful reports, but other ones that are really helpful can include, for example, the family report. Some of you might be using our legacy platform and having access to sending out your reports there, but we've just launched last spring our family reports. And I'd like to share with you for a moment what those look like. So let me just switch. There we go. I think you should be seeing my slideshow again.
And we can see your speaker notes there. So
let me change that a little bit. Let's see. How's that look?
Better. We see your resources page there. Yeah, great.
There we go. All right. I'd like to point out that in the slideshow, there are helpful and important resources for you. The 360 Access Help is very useful tool. And then the video resource library, where our videos that we create, our help videos live. For example, yesterday, we just provided a webinar on how to communicate with families using the family report, and that's available. And videos like that are available at our resource library. We also, of course, have the ERB support contact information in case you'd like to access that. So one thing I want to show you in the slideshow is we put little cheat sheets in here for you. So this describes each of these following slides that I'm just going to zip through here are providing you a little cheat sheet, a reminder of why to use each of these different reports, the things we just talked about. So I'll just scoot through those. We can see if you want to answer the question, are my students achieving? And you want a high level overview, you might use achievement or multi-year. If you want to know what academic areas your students are doing well in or need support in, and you're probably student-facing faculty, you probably want content mastery. And then we just showed you student rosters, where we're getting down to the granular level for each student. Student profiles are also available to you, where you can take a look at specifically how that student's doing. But let's take a look then at this family report. So the family report is a very useful tool. Some schools choose to send out some sort of regular information about their students' test performance. If you're a school who does that, this is a useful tool for you. So the family reports feature basically has three different versions. There's the progress report, the general report, and the detailed report. And each of these reports, we can see on this little matrix chart, provide different features. And so you can select which of these you want to provide to your recipients, to your families. When you get to the progress family report, it's really going to tell how did your student do over the year compared to their past years. So if you're looking for one where families want to see how's my student done over time, this is probably the choice you would want to send out. Instead, if you want to take a look at just this year, what your student did well in, where your student can grow in, then you're going to send out probably the general family report. And if instead you would like to take a look at a more detailed version, a more granular version. Here, if we see to the right, we can see these green and pink pluses and minuses. This requires a little bit of explanation from you, provide some context of what they're looking at, because they're not going to necessarily probably understand how this data is presented without some context. But this one gets them right down to those subheadings underneath their standards. Another tool that's really valuable that we are offering on 360 Access is the 360 Access check-in survey. And when you go to this tool, what you will see is the summary report of how your students did on the check-in survey. And the check-in survey is a self-reported survey that students provide that checks on their levels of emotional well-being, their sense of feeling academically engaged, and really importantly, their sense of belonging. And an increasing amount of research shows that a student's sense of comfort and belonging in their learning environment has direct connection to their academic performance. And so this helps provide even more context to student performance based on their self-reported feelings about belonging. And so that can be really useful for providing context for your staff and your students for moving forward. So when you get to it, there's the dashboard that provides the summary. And then we can also look individually at each test question. So if we look on the right, we can see some of the items that students are asked about. I feel happy, or I feel sad, or I feel good about my life. Or I think one that's especially important for schools is at school, I feel like I belong and I'm treated fairly at school. Each of those can really tell us a story about how our students are feeling. And then there is a version of that report that you can look at that offers that same information over time. So looking at climate change over time, and you can look at, you can break that right down to smaller sub chunks of your school year. Also, just like to share a little bit of information about Selfwise. And Selfwise is also a self-reporting tool. And it's really based on the CASEL competencies, if you are aware of those. CASEL competencies are considered nationwide as being very strong measures of growth and self-awareness for students. So it takes a look at how to measure students' levels of self-awareness, their understanding of how they make good decisions, if they feel comfortable making relationships with other people and able to make positive decisions. And this is also a very helpful tool for schools that are making decisions about how to support their students. You can also break that down to individual students as well. And that can help provide information, especially to, for example, counselors. And we can break those students down by groups as well. And it will ask questions like, I think I have a lot of good ideas, or I think through things before I act on them. Those sorts of questions. It's amazing how honest students can be and how self-reflective they can be about how behave in those situations. Of course, we can also look at that through the lens of looking at a whole group. Just scoop right through that. And then what's really neat is as you utilize these multiple tools, ERB has created what we call the Rose Compass Summary, and it's a cross-program visual view of all of these different pieces put together. So we could look at in a rose chart like you see on the right side and take a look at how a student scores, for example, on their self-wise self-assessment, and then look at their academics, and you'll start to notice correlations between some of these scores. And so the Rose Compass Summary is a very effective tool to utilize as well for people who are using more than one of the ERB tools. So I am going to pause here and just ask for a moment if there are questions, Kelly, that you think need to be responded to verbally.
That's great, Shannon. Actually, we do. And I'm wondering, can you pull up 360 Access and to the dashboard page if you have that handy? We do have a question about what we're viewing here. So I'll kind of talk through that once you've got that.
How's that look?
Perfect. So we had a question about the student roster highlights and why the student names are not in alphabetical order. And great question. So this roster summary, this highlight here is actually sorting on the percent content mastery, that middle column there. So the reason we see Maggie Rodriguez at the top and Lila Bettman below is because Maggie has a 99% demonstrated. She's the highest performer in the school in terms of all the overall testing done, whereas Lila, also a very high performer, but at 97%. So this particular graph sorts on percent mastery of content. Shannon, would you click on the student roster report? That's one of the top page here. I just want to give a view. If you're interested in sorting on students, the default view here, if you'll scroll down just a little bit, Shannon, on the left, you'll see student name and you'll see that number 1 with a little caret next to it, that up caret. So what that's indicating to you is that this particular view is sorting on student name alphabetically and that primary position. All of these columns, anywhere you see in our reports that have these like up or down arrows, allow you to configure the sort. So here it's defaulting to student name, alpha order, but you could certainly make this selection. You could sort on time on test or percent mastery. So there's a lot of flexibility here. And you'll look on that. And so now this is the third sort. So Shannon, click on the left on student name. And let's just click those arrows till we get, click one more time. Okay, so great. Now we're not sorting on student name at all. Let's also click on assessment. Sorry, thanks Shannon for driving. It's faster than me pulling it up. So now you see that number 1 has appeared in that mastery column. And here it's sorting from the lowest performer and will continue on up. So there is some flexibility here in this view that will allow you to constrain your data really specifically. Shannon, if you'll scroll up just a little bit there, you also see that slide bar, which on mastery allows you to constrain even further. And then at the very top, there's a toggle between mastery mode and percentile mode. And Shannon, I apologize if you answered this already, or you talked about this already. I was answering questions in the chat. So if you had already explained this, apologize that.
We did not get to that. So that's very helpful. Thank you.
Okay. And then there were a couple of questions that I answered in the chat, but I'll just say it out here. I know that right now, not all of our reports are downloadable into a PDF or a CSV view. We know that's a priority for our members. We are working on it. I'm going to check in with the team who is in charge of that roadmap enhancement. I'll check in with them after this meeting to see if I can get any more specifics on when we expect that to be available. And I'll provide any information in the follow-up email that we'll send tomorrow with the recording along with the slide deck. So thanks for those of you who asked that question. We'll definitely get back to you with more information. And I think think we got everything. If there's anybody else who has any questions, please feel free to pop those into the Q&A, and Shannon and I will be able to address those for you. But if not, Shannon, was there anything else that you wanted to share as we wrap up?
The last thing I would just mention is if you have more questions or questions that are very specific to your site, we always encourage you to reach out to ERB support. I think I'm sharing the TL resource slide again, hopefully. Maybe I am. Let's see. Maybe I'm now. And also, if you're not aware, we do offer regional training opportunities that have been really fun. We've already done a couple this school year. We were out in California in October, and then in Houston, Texas in must have been the beginning of December.
November.
No, beginning of November. What month is it? But we actually have one coming up in March, on Saturday, March 16 in Atlanta, and also one on Saturday, April 13 in Philadelphia. So those are great opportunities to really do a nice deep dive into utilizing this tool. So I encourage people to check it out if you're interested. And we thank you so much for coming today and spending your time with us.
Yeah, and I think I'll put one other plug in there that Shannon, as well as myself and several other colleagues, we also do professional development and training via Zoom for your school and faculty individually. We'll also come on site. Shannon did a beautiful job of an introduction to 360, but we bring a wealth of knowledge from our own professional careers as educators, and can do some deep dive analysis with you on your team. So if you have any interest in that, just message me. My email is attached to the webinar. So if you have questions, you can send that to me. Of course, you can also reach out to support, and they'll put you in direct contact with me. Lots of links here. We've got tons of webinars that are coming up over the second half of the year. We are here as we're building out our educational services team and what we can provide to you. So let us know if there's something that you need help with. Just please don't hesitate to reach out. I also put in the chat, Shannon was mentioning the view resources. That will link to the CTP handbook, and I put some information on the chat in there for you. And that's a great resource. In fact, I'll add it to this resource slide as well before we send that out. And that has more detailed information about the subtest, but it also has lots of sample questions in there, and that's ultimately what that link sends you to. So know that that's available, and I'll add this to the slide as well. So, all right, I think, just check one more time. I think we've got all the questions, and yeah, thanks everybody for joining us. Shannon, thank you. And we'll get this recording out to all of you. Should be sometime tomorrow afternoon. You're mute, Shannon.
Have a great day.
Take care, everyone.